be time in between the us talking and the hands-on activities if you still want to sign up and do stuff, so there's no rush.
Yeah.
We'll wait till the end to draw tickets.
So this is our backyard gardening workshop. It's part of the Mass State Grange, and the Mass State Grange is a historical society promoting agricultural events in the communities. And it waned in its past years, but it's on the up and up. And I think the way of our community and societies, we're going back to more rural traditions and bringing back agriculture as part of the American ideal. So we set up this presentation here, but we want it to be a conversation more than a presentation. So feel free to raise your hand and share your experience or ask any questions about gardens or talk about your garden at home if you have one or your plans for a garden. The purpose of this workshop, this is one in a 4-part series. So this will be the first one where we're basically going to learn how to design a garden to suit your needs instead of just like, I know I should be planting vegetables. This is what type of veggies do I want? Do I want flowers? Can I put them in pots or a raised bed? So that's what we're going to go over. So if you have a specific question about your own space, please don't hesitate to ask because it'll help us answer questions better and direct what we're talking about more to what you actually want. So we'll get started If everybody's ready. And we do have pencils and paper if you didn't bring something if you want to take notes. Yeah. You just click on it. Cool. So reasons to grow your garden. They're few and far between, but they're not because it's just food. You want to get as much food as you can, and just creating your own access to fresh food is a way to increase your food security. And that's been a huge buzzword in pop culture today is food security because everyone's got to eat. And as most people have had homegrown vegetables and they know they taste great. If you get a tomato from the grocery store and you bite out of that, it kind of tastes like water and nothing else. But if you pick a nice juicy tomato off a vine from your home garden, it's a whole different world. And the satisfaction of like going from step one of planting the seeds or transplanting the plant, you get to actually know the process that goes into making your food happen. So when you're at the grocery store and you see something marked like really cheap, it's like, oh, I'm a little bit more aware now, like this shouldn't be this inexpensive. Like it took a lot of labor and resources to make this food happen. So it's kind of a fun way to learn about how your food is actually being brought to you. And I realized we didn't actually introduce ourselves. Yeah. If you want to know. This is Zach. I'm Zach Ziegler. I grew up in Norfolk, and I'm currently studying sustainable food and farming at UMass Amherst. And it's a great program. I've worked on a farm in Rentham, White Barn Farm, for the past 4 years. But mainly I'm a gardener. My grandparents, my parents, my aunts and uncles, they taught me about gardening. And that's how I got here. And this is Katie Riley. I moved here 3 years ago from Texas, and I've been farming since I got up here. I work at a vegetable CSA. It's a 200-person CSA in Dover, and I have my own livestock farm in Millis. My background is in art, so I kind of jumped a hole. So you can come to gardening from anything. It doesn't matter what you do during the daytime. But, so yeah, that's us. So yeah, everybody has their own reasons for gardening. A lot of people, like Zach said, it's just the satisfaction of finding food that you made and eating it. But what are some reasons that you guys were interested in coming here? If anybody wants to volunteer. Anybody have a reason for gardening? You guys have gardens already. So you do. Cool. Do you grow vegetables or what type of veggies do you have? Ooh. It's a good mix. Turnips. Not many people like to do turnips anymore. They're so good. Very underappreciated. And another major reason is gardens grow community. And that's the thing, because your garden, you're always going to have more food than you can eat. So you end up going to your neighbor's door. You end up going to your extended family, and it's a reason to just get together and share food. And I think that's one of the best parts.
And you can like compare notes with your neighbor. Be like, what are you growing? I'll make sure not to grow that, and I'll grow this thing that you want, and kind of like team up to make your garden spaces more effective in your neighborhood. But yeah. So we basically went over getting started. Like, what is it that you want to get out of your garden? Do you just want to have a nice place that you can go and spend some time outside and dig in the dirt a little bit? Do you want to actually grow food? Do you want to make flowers? Knowing your goals really determines how you're going to go forward with your garden. So there's no wrong way to be outside.
And a lot of the time your goals are determined by the resources you have on hand. Yeah. So you may be a renter, you may own your house and have an awesome backyard, but a lot of people like to have a nice grassy yard for playing, so you're not going to till up your whole yard. But coming from right now, I'm renting at school, and I still want to be able to grow my own food, so I have a couple pots, a couple potted tomatoes, and that's the best part. You can really take growing food and scale it down or scale it up as much as you want.
And also just windowsill gardens. If you don't even have a backyard, you can do it on your balcony or on your kitchen table. There's lots of different ways. This is the way we're both most familiar with because we work on production farms, which is just actually straight in the dirt. Like your flowers can be in your berm, they can be a full-on tilled bed. It's a lot more work up front. You have to break sod, you have to till it and weed, but you can grow a lot more volume typically by production.
And traditional gardens just tilled in the ground, it comes back to your resources if you have the land for that. And a lot of us don't in residential areas, so there's many other methods.
Does anybody here actually have, like I'm assuming yours is in the ground, based on what you...
Raised beds, awesome.
Very nice. So, anybody here have raised beds or worked in raised beds before?
About how high would you say your raised beds are?
2 by 12, so I did 2 inch by 12 inch.
Nice.
Cool.
4 by 8.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's a good
awesome.
space.
Yeah, 4 by 8 seems to be the best size because the 4 foot width, you're able to reach over and like really still work in the bed, and 8 feet is a good length.
And the raised beds are really great because they're so versatile. You can raise them up to waist height for people that can't necessarily, if you have issues like getting down on your knees, you can do a raised bed that you can bend over. And then if you're in a wheelchair, there's table beds, which are basically just a table that the top is about 6 inches to a foot deep, and you can wheel underneath them or sit in a chair underneath them at the table, and it's a lot more, you can still garden outside even if you have more physical restrictions. So raised beds are one of our favorite ways to...
And you can use many different materials to make the actual raised bed. A lot of people just go for straight lumber, and that's kind of the easiest way to do it, but I've seen in all different gardens, especially urban plots, they'll use the cinder blocks a lot, and I love that because it's super easy. You can move them if you want to, but also recently this summer I built a raised bed out of just logs that we harvested out of the woods, and we're able to inoculate those logs with edible shiitake mushrooms. So your raised bed itself is a producing organism.
Making mushrooms while you're growing food in it, so it's pretty fun. And raised beds are also really great for urban settings because if for some reason you're in an area, especially around here with older homes, where there may be lead in the soil because you had lead paint on the house years ago, you raise it up and you're not going to be growing in the contaminated soil. You can even put a barrier down. So if the dirt you have is not good dirt, but you have a beautiful sunshine spot, raised beds are a really quick and easy solution to being able to grow there. And the tabletop. So you can see, you can raise the heights. This one has a really great storage shelf underneath, so they can be your furniture as well as your garden space.
Katie, could I ask you,
Yes.
are raised beds really becoming the thing now? I've heard them talked about more
They're
in
really,
the recent few months. tons.
They're excellent for community garden spaces. A lot of school gardens use them, especially around here, like I mentioned, with soil that's typically contaminated because of lead. They're the best solution. It turned off, we can talk now.
I know, it's echoing here.
Yes, sir.
So you're talking about putting commercial potting soil inside the raised bed?
It's like a mix. You do, if it's a low bed, you can just fill it solid with your potting mix like you do. You don't want it to be soil from the garden because it'll hold too much water. It's a different mixture. It typically has things like perlite or vermiculture in it so that the water drains better. If you have like a really tall raised bed, like if one of these like came from the ground, if it was one that you wanted to bend over, instead of having to fill that whole thing with soil, a lot of people will get like the 5-gallon buckets and you just flip them upside down. So it's like a filler. And so you can just kind of fill in around that and raise it. So you're not filling a full 3 feet of soil.
Another process we've worked with is you take a raised bed and you build it up about 4 feet, and you go out and find decomposing like pine logs, decomposing any logs, and you put those in the bottom, and it acts as a sink to hold moisture and also reduces the amount of soil you have to put in. So that's another cool way. And raised beds are great because they reduce compaction, and compaction of your soil is really what you're trying to fight. Because if you're in the traditional, just regular ground garden, every year, usually you're going in with a rototiller or you're breaking up with forks and shovels, and that's compacting the soil. So say after 3 years, it's not going to filter as well. Your plant's roots aren't going to go as deep.
They have a hard time sprouting.
Yeah.
Like you never, if you can avoid it, you never want to work your soil when it's wet. Because when it's wet, all the particles will mash together more and you'll get a hard crust. And you don't want that because the seeds can't get through, water can't get in. So with the raised beds, you typically get to avoid that because you aren't tilling and there's less.
And you're just keeping that soil alive and healthy and not going in there every year, breaking it up and destroying that culture of life that's in the soil.
So the last, yes ma'am.
I'm sorry.
No, you're great.
So I'm totally new at it and trying to help both of us learn about it. So when you're doing raised beds, there's nothing but natural ingredients in it with the soil. There's not a bottom to it or anything like that. It goes straight to the ground.
You can put a barrier down, like if for some reason you're worried about things leaching up, there's different, like Biotella is a nice brand of plastic that's specific for gardening that doesn't have anything in it you don't want to leach. It's actually, they have a variety that is made from, it's like a corn-based plastic. So after a few seasons, it'll actually have completely decomposed. So it'll help you get through the curve of things not coming back up. It's
You
great.
put a wire mesh to keep moles out.
Yeah, that's another nice thing. You can keep things from coming up and stealing your root vegetables.
Another way to do it for the first season of establishing your raised bed is you can just put layers of cardboard, and that will stop the grasses from coming up, especially if it's a shallow raised bed, maybe 6 inches or even a foot. Yeah, at the very bottom, and then you'll bring in your new soil mixed with compost and vermiculite and peat. Another way to do it is you do what's called double digging, so you have your 4x8, and you'll dig one trench, the 8 feet, and flip that sod over, and then dig another trench and put that sod in with the grass down.
So all the roots are up.
So all the roots are up, and that way, that's the base of your raised bed, and there's gonna be no grass coming up that way, and that all decomposes and just got some good organic matter at the bottom.
Yeah, my favorite way is the cardboard mulch. That's what I do for my home. Like anywhere there's sod that I want to put a garden the next year, in the fall, I lay down all the cardboard, and then it gets snowed on, and in the spring, it's pretty much been like eaten up by worms, and you can just till it in, and you don't have any grass, and you didn't have to dig anything. I love it. It's the easiest. It's ugly for a while because you have cardboard in your yard, but it works really well. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a rule of thumb that, for specific vegetable to depth of soil in a raised bed?
Typically, yeah.
Well, every natural topsoil is usually at least 6 inches, or that's kind of the minimum gauge of what you want. So 6 inches is really the ideal. So that's the minimum size of a raised bed you want. But things like potatoes, where you're going to be hilling that soil back on, you can get away with a little shallower. And things like greens, like lettuce and kale, they're green, so they're going up. They don't need as deep as roots. But tomatoes they really like deep roots because they're producing so much.
Is great. The biggest thing you'll run into with a shallow bed is it'll dry out faster. So that's more what an issue you'll have with a raised bed, is that you have to water it more frequently because the sides are essentially exposed to drying out to the air. Where doing it's called like a hugel bed. It's kind of a goofy name, but that's the bed where you put the logs at the bottom. And they really help because they do hold so much water. You don't have to water nearly as often, which is really nice.
Yeah.
But typically 6 inches is what you'll need.
A good base layer to start at.
You will be watering a little bit more though. Anybody else have any questions on container gardens or raised beds?
I have a dumb question.
No.
What do you think of those tomato plants that grow upside down?
The topsy-turvies?
Topsy-turvy.
They're fun to, like a fun science experiment.
Yeah.
But they're not really productive.
You have to water them a lot.
They're productive, but not as productive as something that
Like if you
is
have
normally
a
grown.
space that you're using them because you have restricted space, like they're great or people like them for if they just have a balcony to grow on. There's other ways of growing in that small space in containers that will get you a much better results and yield. But they are really fun to play with.
They're ugly.
They're ugly, that's plastic. And like what I did, because I lived in an apartment, I used terracotta pots. They were the plastic terracotta. And since they already had the holes in the bottom, it was fun to just plant through that. Because we were doing it as a science experiment with my students. So they weren't as glaringly green, but they were still the topsy-turvy.
The stems grow down and
Yeah.
then they go back up.
Yeah. And if you turn it up again, they'll just keep zigzagging, which is what we were doing.
With any container gardens, you always have to remember you need fertilizer for that,
Yeah,
like some organic fertilizer, because it will leach as you water. It'll take all the nutrients out, and it's not in a living ground, it's in the container. So whether it's a topsy-turvy tomato or a tomato in a pot on your patio, you always got to remember to give it a little extra something throughout the season.
And this is our favorite. There's a few other fertilizers that work really well, but we like this one the most. It's a fish emulsion, so it's just fish bits basically that have been fermented. There's 2 different classes of it, but it's all fish. And this you'll dilute in like a little sprayer, and it does best going on the leaves of your plants. So it smells like low tide. It's not something you want to do like if you have an indoor garden. But if you're doing a container garden or a raised bed, and we still do these whenever we transplant, you just dip them in the fish emulsion, and it's an excellent starter.
So you take like a little teaspoon of that and mix it into your watering bucket, and it's just a
doesn't take much.
good burst. And
This'll
it's
go a
producing
long way.
Gloucester too, which I really like.
Yeah, it's a locally made. Yes.
So does this mean Miracle Grow is out?
If you're growing organically and you care what you're eating,
Yeah.
this is a much better.
So that's good for flowers.
This is Neptune's. There's a couple different brands that do fish emulsion, but these guys are based in Gloucester, so we typically buy from them just because it's nice to buy from.
And you can get that at local stores.
Yeah, I think even Home Depot carries Neptune's.
I don't know if I'm gonna get ahead of you here, but in terms of watering, assuming there's not a lot of rain and it's a really hot summer, we live in Franklin, which has a constant water ban pretty much, except for trash day for 8 hours. So I wondered what the requirements generally are.
It really, you have to just kind of pay attention as you go. Plants, you don't want them to start getting distressed Like, you'll notice when your tomatoes have started drooping, that's kind of too late. But basically, like, what is it, like the first 2 inches of the soil, if they're like damp, you're fine.
Yeah. And it's really just taking care of your plants and noticing them, because you'll notice when it's getting droopy, you'll notice when it's getting yellow. And with the water ban, I don't know if you've looked into rain barrels, is a great way to just harvest your own rainwater. And that's a great way to have water on hand and reduce the amount of water you're taking out of the system.
And if you have like a shed roof or just a gutter that doesn't go into like a underground collection system, it's super easy. Just get those big plastic barrels. They sell really nice fancy ones, but just a big food grade barrel with a spigot at the bottom. You can collect, like a 1-inch rain will fill a 50-gallon barrel.
Can hook it up to your drain pipes. And another good way to deal with water in your garden is mulching. If you mulch underneath the plants, it's going to hold that water in when there is a big rain, and it's going to reduce water getting sucked out from a hot, sunny day.
And when we say mulch, we aren't talking about like pine chips or something like that, because that will affect your soil pH, and some plants will not do very well if it's not a neutral. If you have blueberries, mulch away with pine chips, they'll probably be pretty happy. But we typically use like straw or hay. Hay will usually have seed heads in it, so you'll get a lot of like grass and weeds popping up that you might not be looking for, but it's usually easier to find hay than straw.
And cheaper usually.
It's cheaper.
My favorite mulch component that I've been working with is I'll use newspapers, and then I'll get straw and I'll wet that straw, I'll wet the newspaper, and you do the newspaper first and then a layer of straw. And it looks great, and it decomposes at the end of the season and just adds to your soil. And it totally helps keep weeds down.
Mulching, it does so many things. It keeps weeds down, it helps you retain water. Each season you're adding organic matter to your soil, so it's like composting on site. And then another thing, if you have a lot of leaves, just putting the leaves from your garden, like keep them in the paper bags, like if you have a garage, and then in the spring you can either mulch them with your lawnmower or just spread them on as is, and they're a great mulch that everybody already has. And they decompose a little bit faster than the straw does.
And they're free. That's the best part.
So site selection, like what do you have available? And this depends on what you want to grow. Like if you're just interested in growing lettuce, if you have a shady spot, that's great. You don't need full sun. So site selection is a factor of like, you can either start with what do I want to grow and then pick a site for that, or you can look at the site you have and then figure out what will grow well there.
Yeah, and an easy way I always remember is roots, fruits, and shoots need full sun. So roots being potatoes, fruits like tomatoes, shoots being anything like beans, and then anything like your leafy greens, spinach, lettuce, you can get away with partial shade.
And even like radishes and turnips do pretty well. There's a bunch of different flowers that do well in the shade. They tend to be the lower growing, more compact flowers, but there are a lot of different things for sun requirements. So.
And the best way to find out your sun requirements is, it's a little past now, but in wintertime, you can still get away with it right now. You just see where the sun is brightest at midday, and that'll show you where is your sunniest location, because in winter, the sun is at its lowest point. So that's always a good notch to keep in mind.
So getting your soil tested is something that you don't necessarily have to do, but if you're in an older neighborhood and you want to plant in the soil, I highly recommend it, because there could be different heavy metals present that you don't want to eat. And it'll also tell you if you need to add anything to your soil, like if you need to add iron or calcium or nitrogen, it'll show up in that soil test. So if you're really wanting to make sure your vegetables and your plants are growing not just to their healthiest, but also providing you with a well-balanced nutrients, the soil test is really important. And you can just do that Do you want to explain that? 'Cause
Yeah.
we just did it at our field.
Soil is essentially made up of sand, silt, and clay are the three major particles that's going to make up your living dirt. And that triangle there is, you want to get really nerdy, you always see people selling loam, and that's really the best soil you can get. It's the right amount of sand, silt, and clay. And sandy loam is the best because it drains, but it's still got clay and silt in there, which holds good, tasty particles for your plants. And it's doing a soil test is more if you're really trying to produce, but a really simple soil test, if you're starting your garden out, you can just dig a shovel out of the plot you're interested in, let that dry, throw it in a mason jar with a little bit of dish soap and water, and shake it up and let it settle. And you'll actually see that sediments of how much sand, silt, and clay you have. So if you know you have a really heavy clay soil, that's going to dry out a lot more. And like a sandy soil is going to just dry out as well because it filters right through. But the best thing about soil is it's the easiest aspect of your garden to manage. It's the easiest thing to change. You can throw in compost, vermiculite, peat moss, that's all going to help. Compost, I am a huge advocate for. I can't advocate more. I think it's the best thing you can add to your soil. It's going to bring in living organisms. It's going to increase the porosity. It's going to increase the water retention. And yeah, soil.
Any of y'all have compost piles in your yard or compost pail that you use? Yeah, they're very easy to maintain if you don't have the space for an outdoor compost bin. I have a vermicompost, which is like a worm bin, and it just sits in the kitchen, and I have like the red wiggler like bait worms, like when you go fishing. You just bury your food scraps in their bin and they'll eat them and keep growing, and in the end they'll have processed all of your food scraps and you have an amazing soil that's
You keep it inside year-round?
yeah, no flies, no smell. You have to make sure you don't overburden them, but I can have a compost bin next to my sink and you would never know that there is like food rotting in it. Because if you do it right, it's not actually rotting, it's being eaten. But yeah, the soil test that Zach explained is to know the soil structure, but if you want to know if there's any contaminants, you do need to send in a sample. And UMass Amherst is a great site to send it to. They'll give you the instructions of how to collect the sample. It's like $15.
Yeah, it's actually the cheapest in the country for soil tests.
And they give you, once they run the test, they'll email you a really excellent breakdown of your soil content, all of the nutrients in it, and then they'll actually give you recommendations of how to deal with if there's an imbalance or if something's in it. Yes, sir.
pH levels.
pH levels. There's really simple pH level kits that you can get at any hardware store. They aren't the most accurate. Your soil test that you send in will give you the most thorough explanation of your pH breakdown. But typically, most vegetables and flowers, neutral pH is what you want. There's some berries like blueberries and raspberries that like a more alkaline soil.
Mm-hmm.
So a little like, what is it, like 7
Yeah.
is what you want with that. And that's something that you can do really easily by doing pine wood chips. Like that's the easiest way to bump it up. If you need to bring it down.
Yeah. pH is most important. If you're growing blueberries, that's when you really want to get into pH because they want that acidic soil and that's where the pine's going to come in. But if you are concerned about your pH, I would recommend getting that soil test and it'll tell you what it is. If it's in the range of like 6 to 7, you're fine. You don't have to add. I know a lot of people who will spread lime on their garden every year and it's unneeded. It's expensive. It's actually not good for the soil. You're going to be raising that pH. So, yeah.
There's something I was going to say. Oh, and if any of you guys grow hydrangeas, it's a really fun experiment. The pH affects the flower color. So in your flower bed, if you want to, you can actually like per plant change the pH by like side dressing the plant, like just around the base of it. So you can have one season you could do like pink, green, or yellow and blue, and then change the pH. And those like the blue plant can be pink the next year. The pink plant can go back to being blue. So every year you can change the color of your hydrangeas, which is a really fun, especially if you have kids, it's a blast to get to play with, changing the plant color by the pH. So actually planting your garden, and this is stuff that we have, because we're going to stop talking in a minute, and y'all are going to actually get to do some hands-on activities about seeds and seedlings, because there's benefits of seeding directly, there's transplants, there's growing your own seeds for transplants, there's a lot of options.
Yeah, when you're first starting out, it might be the easiest to go to a local nursery, or there's plant sales, especially at this time of year in May, and buy transplants, sets, starts. It gives you a head start, and you're kind of more guaranteed success somewhat. And so you're able to buy however many tomatoes you want per se, and you can plant those directly in. But direct seeding is something more to ease into, and it's a little trickier. You got to watch it a little more. But certain crops love being direct seeded, and certain crops love being transplanted. And this is kind of a general rule of thumb with those crops, like the smaller crops or smaller seeded crops like carrots, turnips, radishes. Beans especially do super easy. They're huge seeds too, so they're very easy to plant. But things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they take a bit longer in the season to grow, so it's better to get that head start and plant it out as soon as you can, as soon as the last frost is gone.
So you start these inside, and that way they'll be growing for a while. So once you finally have warm weather, you can put them out there and they're ready to go. Because if you tried to direct seed tomatoes here, they would just be starting to produce by the time we get a killing frost. So it doesn't work.
And the reason I put corn on there, a lot of people direct seed corn because that's kind of traditional way to do it. And I did it for years, but chipmunks, they sniff it out so quick. So I've had a really good luck just transplanting corn.
We have a 200-person CSA, and it's 200 shares. So there's 4 people per share. So that's 800 people we grow on 8 acres. So we transplant a lot of our stuff because we want to make sure what we're growing is actually going to produce. So the corn, it seems silly because we do probably like 1,200 plants, and you're sitting transplanting 1,200 plants, but when they all survive, it's so worth it. And it is fun to like see them grow in your window or underneath your lamp and get to watch that progress and then take them outside. So what we'll be doing is I have a table for seed tape, which is something you can do for direct seeding like carrots, because they're so tiny. And if you plant them too close together, they'll get overly crowded and you'll get a bunch of like pinky carrots instead of real carrots. So the seed tape, it's like measured out, and you get to put your seeds, and then you just lay that directly in your soil. And it's already spaced out. You didn't have to sit and like lose the seeds in the dirt, because as soon as they hit the dirt, you're never gonna find it again. They look like dirt.
And we're also going to be doing some transplanting. We got a bunch of different peppers and tomatoes, so you'll be able to take home a 6-pack or a 4-pack, and it's up to you at that point to get it to grow.
And then we have something fun called seed balls. You might have seen them as like seed bombs. There's a couple other names. And it's just a little clay ball that you roll with wildflower seeds, and you can throw them, and then the rain will break apart the clay, and you'll get like a little pocket of flowers, and it's a really fun activity. So we'll all get a chance to go around and do that once we're done. And between now and then, there are snacks and stuff. Maintenance, which we've all actually talked about a bit. The irrigation is a way to deal with watering. You can do drip hose. There's like lines that you can bury under the ground, which is like the most efficient way of watering because you don't lose any to the air, and it's closer to the roots, which is nice. Weed maintenance, pest maintenance. The next workshop we're doing is actually going to be pest and weed management using organic methods, and that'll be in June, which is when all the bugs really start coming out. So.
And pretty much cultivation or weeding is my favorite part of the garden.
Yeah, it's a meditative part.
Gives you a reason to go outside and just spend the end of your day, get home from work, and pull some weeds. And
It doesn't sound like pulling weeds would be fun, but there's something so satisfying. Like you look at something, like you have your raised bed and it's full of weeds, and at the end when it's all clean, it's just like, oh, this is nice. Like there's no.
And it gives you time to hang out with your plants, and that's when you're going to see if they need water, if they're getting hit by pests. So
become aware of what is happening in the space when you take the time to weed. Harvesting is the most fun, obviously, whether you're picking flowers or you're pulling fruit. You're getting what you grew. Getting the hang of identifying when you need to harvest something is what our third workshop is going to be. It'll be harvesting and how to preserve your crops, because you'll be looking at your green beans and thinking, oh my gosh, these are the biggest green beans I've ever seen, but then you pick it and they're woody and you can't eat them. So you learn like there's a sweet spot for every plant, and that comes from just observing them and picking them when they're overly ripe or underripe and knowing when they don't taste good.
I just have a quick question on
Yes.
Pest. I know we have a second workshop coming up, but do you have any just like quick basic tips for pests? Like for instance, I've been trying to do broccoli and Brussels sprouts for the past 3 years, and I'm 0 for 3 because there's this one type of caterpillar.
Cabbage moth.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
The little white butterfly that you'll see, or it's a moth, like early spring, and it'll be the bane of your existence.
Yeah, I can't keep up with them.
yeah,
We do remay sometimes, which is like a really light plastic, it's like a splatter plastic fabric. And it lets light through, it lets air through, but it blocks.
essentially the caterpillars can't, or the moths can't come in to lay their eggs.
Okay.
And you cover your crop with it. It's an excellent tool for season extension because it keeps it warmer as
Just use
well.
like a tent pole kind of thing, or can you put it right on?
You can
top?
put it right on it.
Yeah.
If they're tiny seedlings, maybe support it a little bit, but once they're plants, you can cover it. It's very lightweight. It's pretty cheap. It's like a
Yeah.
200-foot roll is like $20,
Yeah.
or 100-foot roll is $20.
What's it called again?
Remade. If you go to like Johnny's, we actually have catalog samples of a bunch of different seed catalogs and growers over on the door table, and Johnny's has it in their back section of like growing tools
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, because I have the same problem with the Cabbage Loopers. I haven't been able to grow cauliflower for the past 5 years. They just eat it every time, but I still try.
And then you'll get your broccoli head, and that's the thing with growing your own food. You're gonna learn that bugs are okay in your food, and that things that are misshapen are great. It's nothing like, it's better when it doesn't look perfect, because it's really unrealistic to expect things to be that uniform, bug-free, scab-free. It's not real. So like with broccoli, because of the Cabbage Loopers, they're green and they blend in. And you'll be cutting your broccoli into like nice little florets, and then all of a sudden there's like half a caterpillar. And you're like, did I eat the other half? Where's the other half of this caterpillar?
Another easy trick at the beginning of the spring when they are coming in, because if you go out in your garden early spring at like dawn or at dusk, you'll see these caterpillars flying around. You can mix up a little bit of like palm olive oil dish soap and palm oil dish soap, I think. Dawn. Okay. And olive oil. And you mix that up with some water and put it in like a little spray bottle, and you can spray that on your new little broccoli plants, and that can help to stop the caterpillars from laying the eggs on it.
They don't like the taste of it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Potato beetles.
Have a lot of kids that like
Squish.
bugs.
Potato beetles.
Potato beetles are amazing because they evolve faster than any other insect. Like, you literally have less than 3 seasons before they have completely become immune to whatever new pesticide they've come out with. So you can't, like, the best ways to deal with potato beetles is just squishing. And they're neon orange, so they're really hard to miss. And then rotating, because they don't really fly, they crawl. So if you move, like, and they love tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, those are their main, anything that's a solanaceous vegetable, they'll eat that. So if you have them in one side of your yard one year and then move them to the other side the next year, you're less likely, you're gonna keep them confused. It's gonna be hard for them to travel, but they're everywhere. And they are really fun to just squish. They like explode neon orange.
But that is the best maintenance you can do with them, is just be on top of it, go in, squish them all. They feed on wild like nightshades in the woods, so they're ever present.
There's the potato beetle, and then there's the false potato beetle, which will eat They can't breed on potatoes, but they can breed on tomatoes, and they love horse nettle, which is rampant here. And they can fly, so they're just a whole other awful thing. We actually keep buckets of our spent motor oil from the tractor, and we have like not little kid, they're like middle school and high school volunteers, and they'll go along and pick the grown potato beetles and put them in the bucket, and then we let them like light it on fire. It's like the squishing them. It grosses me out to squish them. I can't do it. It's like I can be covered in poop from animals all day, but squishing a bug, I can't do it. So the fire is fun, because otherwise they just survive everything. They're worse than roaches. They will be here forever. So yeah, we have some online resources, and on the table, I don't think we have enough. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, can I go
No,
back?
absolutely.
Pests and squash vine borers?
Yes.
Squash vine borers.
There's a couple different flies that do that.
Yeah, with squash, the biggest thing, because there's tons of pests that are going to hit your zucchini and squash. The best measure of defense for that, I would say, it's called kaolin clay, and it's this natural clay that you can get and you mix in with water, and you spray that over.
Surround.
Yeah.
Often. It's not cheap, but it goes a long way.
Yeah.
If you have a gardening friend, you can split it. But basically, like, you mix it with water and you dunk your whole plant in it, and it comes out like coated white and surround. And there's a couple of theories about how it works. One is that it reflect. The light hits it differently, and it refracts.
Yes.
So the beetles can't actually see the plant the way they normally would. So they can't find it.
Moths, right?
There's beetles, there's moths.
Yeah, there's a lot of different
Bunch of
pests that'll hit them.
It's a waspy looking plant.
Yeah.
I catch plenty of them, but my squash plants still get.
Yeah, they still get hit.
Surround is the best,
Thanks.
and you can reuse it season to season. It's great. It's not cheap,
Yeah.
but it is worth it. Any other questions about this before? Because we have the resources, and then we're going to break for a second and start doing hands-on. Yes, ma'am.
Is newspaper ink toxic?
No, now it's soy, basically.
Yeah.
So it's,
As long as you're not using those glossy ones.
yeah. Newspaper's pretty mild. I actually go to the liquor store and get all of their cardboard boxes that everything comes in, because they have them like stacked to the ceiling. And that's a great mulch. It holds up a little bit longer than the newspaper, and they're free. So it's a nice resource. Yes, ma'am.
Dawn is filming for NCTV.
Yes.
When will this show, or, I mean, Donna is there,
I don't know.
like,
that
I
answer
gave
to that.
up taking notes, so I'll be able to.
Well, we
watch.
actually, part of the sign-up sheet is if you have questions, we're going to have people that will respond to your gardening questions through this workshop series. And then we can send you, if you want the PowerPoint, or if you want a digital copy of our list of resources, you can just email or put your email on there, and we'll send it out to you. So that if you can't keep up with writing the notes, because we're covering a lot of stuff, we can send you digital versions of everything we talked about.
And we'll be able to see this on close.
And it'll be filmed, so you can see yourself asking questions that you forgot about. So yeah, there's a lot of excellent online resources.
Yeah, I can't say it enough. UMass has an awesome extension program. Definitely biased on it, but for good reasons. And you can go online, and they have just tons of stuff, and they have specifically tailored for southeastern Massachusetts. They're going to tell you when the cabbage loopers fly in. They'll give you alerts that week, and they'll tell you when the potato beetles are out first spotted. So things like that, and just keeping up to date with what's happening in the area, pest-wise and weather-wise, is really how you'll stay ahead of it.
You're going to really learn to love the Weather Channel. Weather.gov is the best one, because they don't have all the pop-ups that like the Weather Channel does. So you can actually just look at what the temperature and rain is going to be, instead of like puppies playing video and like all these other things. But knowing your forecast is really important, because you can go out of town and not have to worry about watering, or know how many, like a certain bugs only come out after there have been a certain number of growing days, and growing days are a certain temperature. So if you keep track of like, oh, it's been 30 growing days, all the winter moths are gonna come out and eat all my blueberries, you can be like a step ahead of them and hopefully not lose everything. Oh, these are potato beetles, by the way. This is a larval potato beetle. They look like a weird squishy tank. And that's a grown one, and they would get really hard. They're very hard to squish, and they're sharp. And because they only eat solanaceous vegetables, they're super toxic. So like, if you're squishing one and it like splatters in your eye, it burns, and I just burn them. So yeah, we're gonna do weeding or pest management and weed management organically is the next workshop. The one after that is going to be harvest, preservation, and donation. We actually have someone coming from the Greater Boston Food Bank to talk about if you have shared with all of your neighbors and everybody is done with tomatoes, like here's the right avenue to go through to donate fresh produce, because some places have limitations to what they can take. So it's a good network for that. The last workshop we're going to do is going to be season extension and putting your garden to bed. So if you want to do a cold frame, or the remade for the bugs is also an excellent season extension because it keeps it considerably warmer.
With raised beds, super easy to extend your season.
Yeah.
Just throw some plastic over it.
You can grow for at least another 4 weeks. So yeah, those are those, and we'll email again. We'll have everything posted on the Norfolk Grange website, which is right now on Facebook, but we're actually going to have a real website soon, which is exciting. Anybody have any questions before we break for a second? Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to discuss a pest and helpful birds or insects that you can draw onto?
Yes.
Definitely.
We'll definitely go into that more in the next workshop, but like right now,
Ladybugs.
Ladybugs
kill it.
To keep ladybugs, if you catch them, they love raisins. If you like do the order, like if you order a packet of ladybugs, sprinkle raisins where you're going to release them, and they'll be so stoked about eating those that they won't just immediately fly off. Because that's usually what happens. You like spend $20 on a box of ladybugs, and they go to your neighbors. So yeah, you like trick them into it. Praying mantids are fun because you get the cocoon and you get to watch them hatch.
Yeah, and there's specific plants that you can plant that's going to draw ladybugs in. There's also parasitic wasps are a huge factor of just like, they tend to just go for any pest, really.
They love caterpillars. So they're great in the sweet alyssum, that like really pretty white, low-growing flower actually really attracts parasitic wasps. They love it. So if you do around your vegetable garden a nice pretty border of sweet alyssum, there's a good chance you're going to be pulling in those parasitic wasps to help eat all of those, a good chunk of those caterpillars.
Yeah.
So.
And the healthier garden just comes down to diversity. If you have a huge plot of tomatoes, you're going to have tomato pests. But if you just switch it up, and especially things like the wildflower, they don't have to be in seed balls, but you can just spread wildflower seeds or any flower seeds, and just that diversity of plant life is going to bring in a whole host of natural predators.
It'll help. Yes, ma'am.
Can you container grow berries like blueberries?
You can, yeah. It's a little bit harder because you need like a good sized container, like those like half barrels and things like that. Raised beds are great for them. It's more of an issue of like mulching them to make sure they don't freeze. Like anything that's a perennial in a raised bed is going to be more prone to frost damage because it doesn't have the benefit of being in the deep soil that's kept warm. So raised beds you have to kind of pack in more, like mulch heavily, lay remade over it, or some other like burlap. But it's totally doable.
I've had a lot of luck with strawberries in pots because they send out the runners, and you can do those. They have these funny stacking pots, and they're pretty cool with the strawberries because they'll just make their way down. So it's a good like patio one. And
they do sell varieties of different fruit that are specifically designed to be dwarf, and they can grow in tighter spaces. Yeah.
Cool.
You guys ready for snack time and then activities? Welcome to preschool.
everybody know about the raffle tickets? I don't know.
Some of you guys did come in afterwards, and we have excellent door prizes that Miss Betsy put together beautifully. They're awesome. And there's little raffle tickets. You keep the part of the ticket that doesn't say keep, or that does say keep, and then you put the numbered one in the jar that's over there, and we'll pull it out at the end, and someone will go home with a cool collapsible hose. And there's a gift card to White Barn Farm, which is having a plant sale coming up really soon. And then there's basically like starter buckets for your own garden with like trowels and gloves and fun stuff like that. So yeah, we'll get started at the tables in a minute or so. If you guys want to walk around and look around and pick what your activity is.